Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Nutritional Revolution podcast. We have for you guys today, husband and wife, superstar, super fit, ridiculously good-looking power couple, Juliet and Kelly Starrett. Kelly is a doctor of physical therapy and is the co-author of New York Times bestseller, Becoming a Supple Leopard and Ready to Run. And Juliet is an entrepreneur, attorney, author, and podcaster. And the two of them authored the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Deskbound, if you guys are familiar. And then they've also founded thereadystate.com, San Francisco CrossFit, which was the 21st CrossFit affiliate out there. And Kelly consults with athletes and coaches from everything from the NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB, US Olympics, you name it. He's also worked with Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, all the people, all the athletes, and
all the broken people.
Yeah, as well as corporations. So people in big business. And then most recently, we're going to dive into it here today. They have their newest book coming out called Built to Move, the 10 essential habits to help you move freely and live fully. So we're excited to have you guys on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Kyla.
So
of course. So as our listeners know, we're going to do two truths and a lie. And you guys are actually our first couple on the show, on the podcast. So we're going to have two sets of truths and lies. I don't know if I'm going to know the answer to these, but maybe I'll have an advantage over Nia. So we'll see. So who wants to start?
I'll start. And I will say, I do think you have an advantage over Nia because we are friends, Kyla.
Yeah.
So
I don't,
I've heard out on the weekend. So,
yeah.
Okay. So here are my two truths and a lie. My dietary kryptonite is Diet Dr. Pepper. I have swam a class 5 rapid on every single continent. And I was attacked by a hippo in Zimbabwe.
Oh my goodness.
Go ahead, Kels.
Wow. The things I'm learning about my wife here. Let's see. I grew up in Europe and I was in a traveling folk dance troupe and we won the European national competition for folk dancing. I one time flicked a human head into the river when I was guiding there in Nepal.
Okay.
And I have touched Chris Hemsworth's butt.
Oh man, these are all really good, you guys. You guys have, I mean, if these, okay, so I'll dive into Juliet's first. I feel like I've heard you talk about your fear of hippos before. So I feel like maybe you were attacked by a hippo. And I know you're a skilled rafter. So I feel like it's quite possible you've done your class 5 on all continents. And I feel like maybe your dietary kryptonite is red vines, not Dr. Pepper. So
you're thinking
go with
popcorn.
that. Yeah, or popcorn. So I'll go with that one as your lie. And then Nia, what do you think for Juliet?
I don't know. Number 2 stuck out because every single continent seems kind of crazy. Does that include like Antarctica and whatnot? Because
not Antarctica.
Every continent
okay.
is Antarctica because it's too cold for me there.
Yeah.
That I'm gonna have to follow Kyla's expertise on this, so I'll go for number 1.
All right. And then Kelly, did you flick a human head into the river? I feel like they grew up in Europe. I feel like it's possible. I'm going to go, maybe you didn't flick a human head in the river, or hopefully you didn't. I don't know, but don't tell us. What do you think, Nia?
You'll see at the end of this episode, Kyla.
I'll go for number 3 to switch it up. Maybe it was Liam Hemsworth's butt, not Chris.
Twist. Okay. Yes. Good. Okay. So we'll reveal those for the listeners at the end if you want to find out if Kelly touched Chris Hemsworth's butt and if Juliet likes Dr. Pepper or not, or did get attacked by a hippo, who knows? So we definitely want to talk to you guys about your book. And then we also, having our primary listeners being endurance athletes, would love to, with your guys' skilled experience working with athletes, seeing different athletes, like what are some of the most common kind of areas that you see needing improvement with endurance athletes? And feel free to break them down by cyclists versus like runners too? I'd be curious.
One of the things that I think is we haven't done a great job of in our endurance community is establishing movement minimums. I think it's so easy to track wattage and calories and volume, and it's harder for people to say, yeah, I should squat, I understand, or I should lunge, but why am I doing those things? Why are those things important? And most of the problems we see in endurance athletics is that the time we spend doing very, very high output repetitive skills, that has what we call a session cost. And a session cost, I think people can wrap their heads around. If you and I do brutal intervals, the next day we can look at heart rate variability or resting heart rate or force production. We can say, oh, that's how much that costs my physiology to perform the day before. But we can also expand, and everyone understands, I think, intuitively why we're obsessed with recovery, because it allows us to enhance our adaptation to that response. So exercising makes us weak. It's our adaptation to the response, to the stimulus that we're all after. That's really what this is about. So one of the things that we can expand that idea on is that if you run a marathon or do a big, block, or you have a big trick going on, and the next day it's difficult for you to get into access your full range of motion or native range of motion for fundamental positions. Your hip extension is muted. It's harder to get squat all the way down. You're super stiff. That's also a session cost. And because oftentimes it's easy to engage in these mid-range positions. Cycling is very mid-range. Running slowly is very mid-range. Swimming is, except for the overhead shoulder flexions, very, very mid-range with the hips. You can go a long time and perform a lot of work and not realize that you're incurring the session costs in terms of your positioning. And suddenly you don't have access to hip extension or rotation, and it starts to truncate your function and your motor solution. So your back starts to hurt because your quads are tight and you don't have hip flexion, or your knee is hurting or your ankle's hurting because it's more difficult for you to extend your leg because of the bike volume you did. And so subsequently you end up deep into these rabbit holes when the idea was, if we could have maintained our positioning and we had some minimums there, then you can just keep an eye on the actual physical movement cost of the sports you're doing.
And for our listeners, when you say mid-range movement, talking about the hip, they're not to kind of like break that down or simplify it, they're not getting that full range of motion or extension when you're sitting on a bike.
We haven't defined that. So if you're cycling, if you're chewing your stem, theoretically your knee is coming more to your chest, right? But your knee is not coming behind your butt in extension, right? You're not getting into a lunge shape, and you're certainly not getting into a very big hip extension shape on the bike ever. You may be extending your hip during a pedal stroke, but you're not taking your hip into extension. And so subsequently, your movement choices, movement options, total range of motion starts to become limited, because that's really efficient for your body. It's not a fault. You're not doing anything wrong. It's just that the amount of volume we're doing and spending doing some of these sports has a range of motion cost. And that's actually how we think about, we have moved away. We inherited a bunch of language early on that was like, this is a fault, or this is good, or this is bad, or this posture is good, or this posture is bad. And now we start to say, hey, that's not really useful, because that usually means we're talking about injury or pain. Instead, we can say, hey, look, if you're doing something for a long period of time or engaged in a certain sport, and it starts to cost you in access of your basic physiology, like if you round your back a ton as you're sitting at the desk and try to turn your head, it doesn't turn very far. And if you can sit up and take a bigger breath, your head turns. So if I'm on a bike, I'm riding the C shape because it's more aerodynamic and that's the position I'm in on the bike. All of a sudden, my diaphragm doesn't work very well. My pelvic floor doesn't work very well. My shoulders don't work very well. Theoretically, I'd get off the bike and have access to that again, but that's not the reality. The reality is those start to cost me in my ability to access my physiology. And then when I end up having pain, I never connect my lack of range of motion. I'm not even talking about training, but my inability to access fundamental shapes with why I may be having pain.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously sitting on the bike probably translates or maybe is similar to some extent to with sitting at your desk all day.
Weird, except it
You know what, Kyla?
accelerates and your penis gets to go numb, which is cool. And this is coming from like a cyclist. I love our trainer. We have 2 watt bikes in the garage. I mean, we live on the bike. Biking is our jam. It's probably the head of all the sports we do. It has the highest cost on my body in terms of if I don't jump on my positioning, like my low back aches, and it really starts to cost me in the ability to have my hip and extension and be powerful.
Yeah.
And he's really not kidding there. I mean, he never really complains of like orthopedic injury or pain. Like he's a very durable person, but if we are doing a lot of biking and a lot of long biking, he feels it in his low back. And if
I don't stay on
it. If he doesn't stay on it. And so he's got to be all over like, if we are doing a ton of mountain biking, he's got to be all over his body maintenance because, he can't buffer sitting in that position for hours and hours on end without actually putting some input into his body after the fact.
Yeah. So you just touched on something that I want the listeners to hear too. So you go or say you're planning on going for a long bike ride and that's a situation for you. The low back is a problem. When do you do these or use these tools, these mobility tools or habits to help, like you're saying, get back into that positioning, either supporting going into it and or after? What should that look like, that timeline?
And one of the things that we see is we have to look at when people have some availability in their schedule, right? And I think what you should do is just in the middle of your ride, stop the Peloton, get off your bike, engage in a 15-minute downward dog set. No, it's never going to happen. Like that just doesn't happen. Wait, right up to the coffee shop and then excuse me guys, let me just stretch my hips. Like that's not gonna happen either. So what we want to be is realists. And one of the things that we start to see, honestly, is that if I look at your behaviors, like for example, you roll up to the house, you pull your bike off I'm assuming that you've been awake for 10 minutes and you've probably barely eaten anything. And
me,
again,
no.
I know
Well, no, Kyla's eating.
This is not true, but the point is, most of us are saying, hey, I want to maximize my sleep. And are you preparing your body for a fight? Right. And what we think is, I have time to warm up. I have to ride to the trail. I won't take any hard strokes. But if you are thinking in that term, what ends up happening is that you're not even having access to your positions beforehand. So what I'd recommend is before your friends get over there, while you're sipping your coffee, like I go out and pump up all the tires and mess around with all the stuff. That's part of my job in the family to prepare the bikes. But I sit in a squat. I get in big lunges. I try to open up my hips. I do as I'm making coffee, I throw my leg up on the counter and I'm doing some pigeon. And it's not like I have to do a big routine, but what I find is if I can get a little bit of movement, remind my brain these are positions I have access to. And then afterwards, I can ask myself, well, what's stiff from the ride? Let me go ahead and address that first. My hips are a little tight. Hey, I notice that my quads are a little bit blown. For me, I have a super narrow pelvis. So this is I'm 6'2", 235 pounds, but I have the skinniest butt ever. I have this little tiny narrow pelvis. And so I ride on one of the narrowest saddles.
Tyler, you're laughing because that's
not
true.
I ride on the narrowest saddle. My butt is this big, but my hip bones are this far apart.
Oh, interesting.
So I ride on the narrowest saddle that Specialized makes on my power saddle. But subsequently, I got to put my femur somewhere. And so my angle from my pelvis out to my knee is a little bit greater than someone who has a little bit straighter.
That's why he looks like a circus bear while he's riding his bike.
I look like a circus bear for many reasons.
That's one of the reasons.
However, Russian circus bear. So, however, one of the things that happens because of my unique anthropometry, my geometry, is that my adductors, the inside of my thighs, get super stiff. And that means—
Are those connected to your low back?
They're weirdly attached to your pelvis.
Wouldn't you know?
Weird.
Weird.
It's not
something
that
on your leg
I'm
is
doing
connected
something
to your
wrong.
back.
I have good cycling technique. I have even pedal power because I practice on the watt bike all the time. Right. I've been fitted by Retool, the best bike at Specialized. It's not these things. it's my unique ability to generate high amounts of force with my anthropometry. My particular pattern is my adductors get stiff. So I have to spend a little time. And if I do a little bit of work in the evening or after the ride, boom, I feel better.
Well, and I'd like to bring everybody into the most elite performance warm-up that we recommend for literally everyone, and that is jump roping. I mean, one of the reasons we're such fans of it is it's accessible. Everybody can buy, if you can afford a bike and an endurance rider or whatever, or a pair of Hoka shoes, you also can afford a jump rope. And, we recommend this to all adult athletes and also all the kids we work with. We find that just spending 10 minutes doing a little bit of jump roping is the best way to warm up for running. It's awesome for swimmers because you're getting a little shoulder rotation in the mix, and it's just easy and accessible. We actually have been really into this surf documentary that's on Apple TV right now.
Yes.
It's called Make or Break. I don't know if anyone has watched it, but we're really into it. And wouldn't you know it, the surfers have picked up this lesson. And in a bunch of the episodes, you see the surfers out on the pavement before their big events and they're jump roping, right? So
awesome.
It's such a useful tool as a warm-up, and you don't need to do it for 20 minutes. It's 5-10 minutes, and you can you get a little bit of sweat on, get a little bit of input into your tissues before you do whatever it is you're going to do. Because, I will say that we are all horrible, and including Kelly and I, in being endurance athletes because we like to mountain bike. I mean, I would say endurance athletes are probably the worst offenders of actually doing a real warm up, right? Everybody just puts on their running shoes and goes. And, we see our own kids who are on swim team, they just jump in and all of a sudden are swimming like 1,000 meters without any specific warm up. And so that's why we're such fans. We recommend swimmers and any kid athletes and endurance athletes spend 5 or 10 minutes jump roping before you do your sport. It's really going to reap a ton of benefits. The other thing, just to add to what Kelly said, is in terms of mobility practices after the fact, I mean, we are such realists. And one of the things we talk about in our book is trying to help people create a movement-rich environment, because what we know is everybody out there, especially endurance athletes who probably are time crunched and particularly time crunched because a lot of endurance sports take a lot of hours. The training takes a lot of hours, right? It's like 1 to 3 hours often. And so, endurance athletes are particularly time crunched. So if you tell an endurance athlete, like, okay, do all of your training and make sure you've got your food in order. And, oh yeah, you've got to go to an hour-long mobility class every day in order to maintain your body. They're going to be like, nope, check the, I'm going to cross that one off the list. Like, nobody has time to do that. But what we've been saying for literally 15 years is 10 minutes a day is all it takes. And we're huge fans of this idea of compounding. So if you do 10 minutes a day of mobility work on your body, and you do that 7 days a week, that's 70 minutes a week. If you compound that over weeks and months and years, that's a massive amount of just input you're putting into your body. And here's when we mostly do it is on our living room floor while we're watching Make or Break or other TV shows, right? So ideally, right when we get back from a ride or do a workout or something, we're spending a little time. And, in Kelly's case, it's really mandatory that like the moment he steps off his bike, he's got to do some work right then. Yeah. But look, I mean, we know everybody's sitting in front of their TV for a few hours a night. And we just keep a bevy of mobility tools around our environment. And we have Normatec boots and Hypervolts, and we have a whole environment where it's really easy to just get some work in on our bodies. And so we really are not precious at all. I mean, of course, we could say like, you've got to do your perfect warm up and then your perfect cool down that includes these specific mobility things, but that's not what reality is for people. And we live in reality and we want to support people where they are. So we're like, anytime you can get some soft tissue and mobility work, on board in your body, like that is awesome. That's a win. And you really can see gains and changes, through a compounding effect. So today you might just have 10 minutes to work on your adductors or your quads, but again, you can move on to the next part of your body the next day. And it really does add up.
That's awesome. So kind of touching back a little bit to you were mentioning the pigeon stretch and stuff like that. Were you saying you'll do that stuff before you ride, Kelly, or is that after?
It can be either one, really look at what time is available for you. And usually there's a few minutes where people are on their phones or before they left the house. The real thing to do is to see if you can look at your structure of your environment and ask, can I do this before I leave? The second you're out the garage door, you're not going to do anything. You need to chat up your friends. You need to worry about other things. So we see the same phenomenon in skiing or wilderness, outdoor sports, is that you get dressed and then you go and you put your leg up on the ski slope and stretch your hamstring for 8 seconds. I mean, that's incomplete. The best thing you could do is say, hey, I'm going to get in a little bit of movement. If you just did 10 minutes of kind of a sun salutation yoga flow, you would find that it was easier to warm up on the bike. Your biking went better, and that your body didn't kind of have to go through those like, oh, I feel terrible. And then it's 45 minutes in before you warm up. We're trying to increase people's density on the bike and less of a warm up and acclimation. And, so if you can get a little bit of movement in, whether that's just sitting on the ground, 90-90, long sitting, getting to kind of a deep squat, just in front of your TV for 10 minutes before you put on your kit and roll out, you'll find that you're better prepared and your first intervals and work sets are better.
Definitely. And so for someone like a low back situation, you mentioned adductors as a target point, pigeon stretching, anything else from a mobility area that they should be hitting on? Or YouTube videos we can link to.
I can say as an observer, Kelly does two things immediately upon seeing anyone who comes to him with a complaint of low back pain. The first is he teaches them how to breathe. And the second is he prescribes walking for them. So I'll let him explain the why behind those two things, but I think that might come as a bit of a surprise to people that his prescription, here's Kelly Starrett, like the king of physical therapy, and his prescription for low back pain people starts with walking and breathing.
Is that the kind of like teach a man to fish?
Right.
It is a bit.
Yeah.
Women already know how to fish, apparently.
Yeah.
When people are managing kind of chronic persistent low back pain and they're of low function, because remember, every athlete also has someone in their family who probably isn't quite as obsessive as we are about these things. And what we find is really altered breathing mechanics. I'm not talking about like we need to meditate so that your brain calms down. That's great and certainly a valuable part of a breathing practice, but ultimately looking at how well you can ventilate and how effectively you're ventilating. We end up on the bike particularly just as less effective breathers sometimes because of the positioning, and we end up doing a lot of mouth breathing, neck breathing, instead of having access to the diaphragm, restoring the total motion and movement of the trunk. So we found that for our endurance athletes, if we can focus on breathing mechanics, we end up improving their VO2 max. People are kind of into that, right? Like we get you breathing and all of a sudden your upper back is more mobile, means you can move more air in and out. Second effect that happens is that we see things like increased CO2 tolerance. So suddenly now you can grab more oxygen off the hemoglobin because in your breathing practice, ventilation practice, you're actually more adept at handling higher circulating blood CO2. And so I don't need to program then. I can just do that as a warm up on the way in on the bike or the first 15 minutes. So if you're on the trainer, let me give you a simple breathing drill. And you've done this, I'm sure, with me, is that, and you've been in my gym for many years and understand how obsessed I am around breathing mechanics. But I want you on the trainer, if you're listening to this, to do a 10-second inhale at the top of a minute. So the minute starts and you're going to take a 10-second inhale through your nose. And what you're going to find is that you're going to get to 4 or 5 seconds and you're not actually able to ventilate slowly and controlled maximum. But what we're doing here is starting the clock on CO2 tolerance, but we're also forcing you to actually expand your ribs for the first time maximally. So we have this chance of really hitting that. Then I want you to hold your breath as long as you can while you're spinning, and then until you die, until a little pee comes out, until you feel like a big burn is going to happen. And then when that happens, go 2 more seconds. Like you really are a pansy. Like you can do that. Then I want you to recover after this little death, nose only, and you're going to repeat that on top of the next minute. So every minute, 10-second inhale, max hold, and see how far you can get. And you should only have about 20 seconds to recover. Ideally, that's how long you should be able to do this. And you can start to warm up that way. You'll see that you'll get sweaty. But what we've just done is snuck in some really intense mechanical work to make sure that your trunk is working, your diaphragm is working, that you're circulating, that we're getting more movement in the stiff upper back. We're asking all of those tissues to do their primary job to ventilate. And then the second piece that Juliet brought up is the walking. And one of the reasons that we are big fans, especially in our endurance athletes, believe it or not, of trying to get more non-exercise activity is that, again, we're trying to reduce the session cost. So what's happening is that through these intense exercise bouts, you're actually creating a lot of change in your tissues and physiology. And part of that system then is tearing those damaged tissues down that are repairing, right? And remember, that's a feature of the system. But the normal processing of managing all that turnover, all that metabolism, plus all the soft tissue turnover is you've got lymphatic fluid sequestering that stuff. And your whole lymphatic system is bootstrapped into your movement system. So if you want to decongest after your runs, we suggest more walking. If you're a big rider and you think, I've done all my exercise, this isn't about that. This is about how can we help you manage those adaptation responses more effectively. And one of the worst things you can do as an endurance athlete in terms of the tissue quality and maintaining sort of the health and mobility of your tissues is to red line, do your thing, and then sit. Ideally, we just want to keep moving. And it's not because we're thinking you need to cool down. That's not what it's about. It's because we need you to manage your circulation and all of that adaptation. So those two things make a big difference. But then we can start to ask, well, do you have access to these fundamental positions? When, we can play this test for everyone. Has anyone here ever rolled their quads out or calves out? Yes, of course. Of course you have. You're an athlete. But now I say, why did you do that? Because you worked them, right? Okay. When's the last time you rolled out your trunk? I'm talking about your stomach or your obliques, right? Your abs. And the answer is never. You've never done that before. So your whole life you've done one.
But do you use those when you exercise at all?
Right. They only connect your upper body to your lower body, and they're just house your organs and your diaphragm.
Yeah.
You have done 10,000 Pilates daily 100s and 1 billion crunches. And when your abs are sore, what do you say to yourself? Sweet. I'm going to have a 6-pack. Yeah, I'm all
12-pack.
And you do not treat any of the musculature or soft tissues of your trunk commensurately with the way you treat your hips or your quads or you get a massage. When you get a massage, you're like, massage my stomach. No one touches your stomach. So
that's true.
If you're in Korea, they do.
They will crush you.
Yeah.
But the idea here is, we're not treating our trunk musculature connective tissue systems the same way we're treating any other systems of our body. So there's a lot we can do even from there. Then we can look at your range of motion and ask, well, why don't you have access to this range of motion? That's contributing to why your body is waving its hand and asking for help.
Yeah. Right before I hopped on the podcast, Sid goes, tell Kelly I'm gut smashing right now.
Sid is my boy.
Yeah.
He knows.
Yes,
he knows.
Sid.
And that's how we call it. We call it gut smashing because we're like, intra-abdominal massage, like whatever. Like you need to get on your roller or get on a ball while you're watching TV and then, feel angry and feel upset and feel queasy. And I don't really care. I work with some really high level teams. They hate this. And the more you swim, the more you hate this because swimming really challenges this anterior line to be able to be stable and to rotate. And when you push on those things, people hate how they feel. Suck it up, Buttercup.
Well, I would actually say for me, I find it to be weirdly relaxing and calming. And
vagal nerve. Come on, simulation.
And so we actually, of all these mobilizations, I mean, appreciating that we're recording this in the morning and Sid is doing it when he can and when it works for him. But we find that of all the mobilizations that we prescribe, this is one of our favorite to prescribe to people right before they go to bed because it really does have a downregulatory effect on your body and your brain, and it helps you fall asleep. And,
awesome.
We're obviously obsessed with sleep. So anything we can do to make our sleep more awesome and more optimized, like we're into it.
You will improve your trunk function. It'll improve your intra-abdominal pressure. It will improve your diaphragm function, which means increased VO2. So, for example, it's important as we're thinking about any of the strategies we're talking about that no one part of your body system works in isolation. I think that's really what we think. We're like, nutrition, it's isolated over here, right? But if we take nutrition alone, one of the things we love about nutrition is it gives us a chance to eat with our families and friends. And so I have the psycho-emotional components of food that isn't about fueling, right? And so that's a good example of how tightly coupled these systems are. I mean, you've made friends on our bike club because you walk up and you're like, want to try my new bar? Like you always have some new bar, some new thing you're trying out. And we're like, what does Kelly have today?
Snacks,
So you know, when we start to see things like, you know, understanding that your diaphragm accounts for 30% of your blood flow, total blood moving in your body during aerobic exercise. So if your diaphragm isn't functioning well, guess what? Your VO2 max shuts down. And if your diaphragm fatigues, guess what happens? You actually lose power to your legs. As soon as your breathing goes, you lose power to your legs. Your brain's like, well, you can't breathe, so you're not going to have all that wattage. So if I can improve the function and efficiency of your diaphragm, not only can I improve your VO2 max and your efficiency of your breathing, but also I can unlock hidden watts. And guess what I'm all about? Free watts.
Everybody wants some free watts.
Free watts.
I love that. So I think after we're done recording, I need to go gut smash because I rode this morning. So.
Yes.
So want to be mindful of your guys' time here. You guys have a book coming out and I have a copy here. I have to say the meet cute story in the beginning might be one of my favorite parts of the book.
Will you
know
just
that story
let everyone know what you're talking about?
Yeah. So I mean, tell them about the book or your guys' little love story of like rafting experience. And
we can't do it in a summary way. So let's hear it, Kyla.
Well, I mean, you guys had it was like a rafting. You guys were younger, obviously, but like, I don't know if was it college or something, but you guys were out somewhere and Juliet was basically trying to tell Kelly to tighten up his vest so he didn't drown. And he wanted to be cool and let it stay loose and ended up flipping his raft. And Juliet came to the rescue and ripped him out of the water, gave him a big smooch. No, just kidding.
To make that even worse, it's at the World Championships.
Oh,
we are the national team, men's, and we are very good and like national champion slaloms. And then Juliet's team is full of world champion, legendary women. So when we got rescued, it was literally a big setup for me to get Juliet to feel like she had rescued me. That's really the short story.
Oh, it was a ploy. You did it on purpose.
No,
no, it wasn't a ploy.
We got our asses.
It sounds good, and it sounds good.
And Juliet saved us, and that really was the deal. She was like, well, okay. And I always say to people, I'm like, that was the first time Juliet saved my life.
Yeah. And was it the last?
No.
No.
Oh, no. Just the first time. It was
just the first of many. That's adorable. I love it. So tell us about this book. Who's it for? What are we diving into? Tell the listeners, break it down.
Sure. I mean, I think the first of all, it's 5 years in the making. And, you know, we've been talking about this around the dinner table for many years, and we finally had some doors open and some space in our lives to be able to write it. But I think there's it comes from sort of two places. I mean, the first is, as you know, and we talked about, we've been working with high performers and athletes for most of our career. And for the earlier part of our career, we were really focused on what we've been talking about before. How can we make people faster, stronger, lift more, bike faster, run farther? And that was really our focus. Mm-hmm. And that was also the focus of becoming a supple leopard as well. And so that sort of framed out the early part of our career. But since that time, you know, we have, first of all, been getting older. And second of all, we live in a community of people in a little suburban part of Marin County near you, Kyla. Mm-hmm. And we are surrounded by people who are weekend warriors, recreational athletes, many people who wouldn't even use the word athlete to describe themselves, but universally, they all care about their health in some way, whatever that means to them. They want to feel good in their body. They want to be able to do the things they want to do. They want to be able to move freely. But what we started seeing, because we are often the go-to people in our community, for health and fitness related questions, is we started seeing that by and large, people were confused, that the explosion on the internet of information actually had a paralyzing effect on a lot of people in our community. They don't know what to do. They don't know what diet to follow. They don't know what type of exercise, how much exercise to do. And I think layered on that, we also started feeling like those of us who are in the health and fitness business were like if we think of ourselves as like 1%ers, man, we have done a lot to make ourselves more optimized. You know, when I look at the type of athlete I was when I was a D1 rower at Cal and how unoptimized I was from a variety of...
You weren't eating food.
I wasn't eating food. I was doing nothing to recover. I mean, the amount of things I was not doing was the many. And so we've really had these amazing advances in this space over the last 20 or 30 years that those of us who are athletes or are nerds about this stuff, we've really been the beneficiaries of it. But what we've lost is we've left everybody else behind. We've gotten way better in this little mini vertical we're in. We've gotten more optimized. People are running faster, farther, stronger, taking the right supplements, tracking everything, following the right diets. Like we're doing pretty well over here, but we are a small percentage of people, and we have totally overwhelmed people out there in the world. And so there's a ton of confusion.
If we looked at diabetes, obesity, childhood diabetes, obesity, chronic pain, surgeries, ACL injuries, choose something, social isolation, alcohol dependency, like substance abuse. You're like, well, how's it going? How's our $1 trillion annual fitness, experiment? How's it transforming society? And we seem to be falling on our faces.
And then
they're not trending well.
Yeah,
every single one of those things is in the wrong direction.
Like it's not working. Like we're doing all this stuff to optimize ourselves, and somehow it is not translating to the broader population, and we're not doing a good job over here. And the other thing we started seeing is in the pandemic, we saw everybody, these are like regular people, were able to track like their SaO2 and their blood oxygen levels. And they were able to track these like health benchmarks. And we started talking about the fact that the only real benchmark that most people have for their health is their blood pressure. Like that's kind of the benchmark, right? And everybody can say, okay, 120/80 is decent blood pressure. It's not necessarily good, but it's not bad. But then if you go up to 130, you think, oh, okay, I need to keep an eye on it. If your blood pressure gets up to 130, that's you take a moment to think, okay, that's something around my health that I need to keep an eye on and maybe put some attention toward. So we started asking ourselves, why aren't there benchmarks for all the things that we think are important in terms of taking care of our health?
Benchmark is an objective, clear line, and we're able to not say sleep more. Are you getting this much sleep? Are you getting this many grams of protein? So we've created as a handful of behavioral vital signs and benchmarks, but also some movement and positional benchmarks and vital signs. And I think we're like, why can't the squat or why can't hip extension be a vital sign?
Yeah, like why isn't it just a piece of information that everybody has, and it's not good or bad? You're not a bad person if you have a bad score. As I have the squat is like the hardest one for me in this whole book. And, I was able to be a D1 rower and a 3-time world champion and have poor ankle range of motion. But also it's something I'm aware of, and I have a benchmark for it. And I know as I age, because I want to be able to keep my balance and as much of my mobility as I can, like that's a particular area for me. I need to keep an eye on it. And I have a benchmark, and also our benchmarks aren't, some complicated scoring thing. It literally is red, green, or yellow. Like it's easy to understand, right? And I am in the yellow from a squat standpoint. I may never get to the green, but man, I know that I don't want to fall into the red. And so we think we are really excited to put out into the world this idea that there can be these objective movement and behavioral benchmarks for our health that literally everybody can do. And what's important to understand here, because your audience is mostly people who would use the word athlete to describe themselves. When we go out and work with athletes, we see that most of them are also missing a lot of these benchmarks and or missing range of motion or sort of not prioritizing some of these behavioral metrics. So one of the things that we are so excited about is we feel like it's a simple and objective way for people who are athletes to get some baseline information. And it's also a way to bring people that we've left out of this health conversation back into the conversation.
Yeah. Can you give us an example? You mentioned the squat for you. I mean, coming in at rating yourself as a yellow. What is a yellow in a squat versus a red?
Let's hear it, Kels.
Well, you should be able to have your feet straight and keep your heels on the ground and squat all the way down to the ground and hang out there and breathe. That's typical normative range of motion of your hips. That's what every doctor says you should be able to do. Every physical therapist. And what's key is, I think, in Supple Leopard, we really made the case for the reason you should improve your range of motion is it improves your output. But really, most people don't care about the range of motion. when we say mobility, we're saying, do you have range of motion? Do you have control? But really, can you move effectively in your environment? That's really what this is about.
And can you do the things you want to do?
Which is what it's really about. Can you move through the environment and do the things you want to do? And most people discover this in a really brutal way, where suddenly I can't do a downward dog. I can't learn this new swim. I fell because my ankles were so stiff, right? So I think what's nice is when we give people these benchmarks, it allows us to say, hey, I should pay attention to that. So squatting all the way down comfortably, that's a green. But there's a green range where you're saying, hey, maybe it's not perfect, but I've got control of it. Squatting to 90 degrees, kind of parallel without, maintaining that, that's very useful.
Moving on from squat, because this is apropos to your expertise, Kyla. The area of our book where Kelly struggles the most is on the nutrition side. And one of his big issues is he doesn't eat enough. And so having these benchmarks has been really transformative for him in terms of actually bringing some awareness to making sure that he's eating enough. But I'll let him talk about his challenges.
Thank you. So I think what's useful is, I just want to say here, we appreciate that people have cultural histories of eating, that they have ethical reasons, that they have strategies and things that make them feel good. We agree. And so whether you're a carnivore athlete, paleo or vegan or vegetarian, for us, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're getting enough protein, especially as an athlete. So we really recommend, and it's probably in the ballpark where you are, is at least 1 gram of protein per pound body weight, which ends up being quite reasonable if you're trying to grow or heal or recover or
perform as an
or you're
athlete.
over 50. And endurance athletes need a lot. And we're just not talking about muscles. We're talking about your brain and your small intestine and your connective tissue. And on days where you're not going hard, it probably looks like 0.7 to 0.8 grams. But what's useful then is you can start to say, well, if that's it, how do I do that? I want to do it with just steaks and a hamburger. Cool. That would be a disaster for me because my triglycerides would go through the roof. I don't process it. Like I would look like I just don't handle the fat very well. So I choose protein sources that, are a little bit less calories and less fat. That's that works better for my physiology. So in that recommendation is a lot of individualization. But also in there, we found that you can start making decisions about eating and when you're timing. So for example, intermittent fasting came around and we're like, this is kind of cool. Like, I don't really feel starving in the morning. But when I found out that I did intermittent fasting, I was deeply undercaloried by the time I needed to train.
Right.
So that made my workout suck. And I also found that my compressed eating window meant I had to eat a lot of food in a very little time. And that didn't work at all. And then what I found out also was that, boy, in order to get my baseline macros and to get all the micronutrients I'm supposed to get, I had to eat again at like 9:30 or 10 o'clock. And guess what? That sucks.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to bed full and it messes up my sleep. So I started making decisions about, hey, it was a lot easier for me to get some fruits in the morning, some good protein sources, whether I'm managing carbohydrate or not, that can be a fuel source discussion. But micronutrients and protein, those are the things, and fiber. And so for me, having this benchmark means that I can start making informed decisions about the ways and strategies that I'm eating, whether that's keto, paleo, traditional athletic diet or not.
The other thing that I would add, and one of the things we love about these benchmarks is, number one, if you actually eat 800 grams of fruits and vegetables and meet the protein minimums that we suggest, turns out that you're going to be less likely to eat a bunch of junk because you're actually going to be full, right? So it's really lovely from a satiety standpoint. And, the other thing that we found in people who've been testing this out and trying this is that it's the first time any diet they've ever followed in their life feels expansive versus restrictive. I think, so much of what we've taught people from a dietary standpoint over the years, and I think part of the reason why so many diets fail is that it feels restrictive to people and it doesn't honor people's cultural traditions. And it doesn't honor the fact that eating is like one of the most fun things you can do as a human. And it's one of the ways that we really connect with one another. Like one of the reasons intermittent fasting didn't work well for me is I was like, hey, I actually like to eat dinner with my kids.
Yeah.
I want to eat the same thing they're eating. And I don't want to create a bunch of weirdness for my 2 teenage daughters around food because, you know, I'm eating one thing while they're eating another thing. Like we want to eat together as a family. The eating process is where we really connect as, you know, we connect with our teenage kids. Like it's a super important part of our own family culture. Yeah. And so, you know, what we wanted to put out there is like, hey, you know, this is an expansive way of eating. It's going to limit the amount of junk that you even want to eat in your life. And, you know, it turns out that, you know, most people want to feel good in their body. And that's the other thing is that we found when people eat enough and eat the right kinds of food, they actually feel better and have more capacity.
Stop it.
To do more things.
You're saying that athletes that feel better, perform better?
You know,
I just gorged on an entire flat of Trader Joe's blackberries.
Oh, nice.
Right. And then I was thinking to myself, oh my God, look at how much sugar all these berries are.
You your macros.
That was 130 calories, 450 grams of or 350 grams of blackberries was 130 calories.
Yeah.
So go ahead and just crush the crap out of a pound of cherries. You need a gorge, eat a full pound of cherries, 230 calories, plus all the fiber, plus come on, we've lost our minds.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And it's complete. I mean, it's, like you're saying, totally micronutrient dense, and for the listeners too, they're referring to EC Synkowski's 800 gram challenge. Yep. And we did a podcast with her as well, and we can link her in that episode, but she was mentioning too, for our endurance athletes, that I think a lot of fear is like, oh my goodness, I don't want to get all that fiber because I'm going to have GI issues on the run. And there's absolutely ways to still hit 800 grams of fruits and veggies in low fiber options. And she brought up things like watermelon and stuff like that, where it's totally doable no matter what the goals are from the athlete.
Let me be honest. Let me just talk directly to the people.
Yeah.
You're an athlete and you're afraid of eating 4 apples. You're super fragile. What is wrong with you that you can't handle 4 apples? You're
4 apples is 800 grams.
And ask what the hell is going on here? Come on. Should that be, 800 grams of broccoli? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
Do you need to eat a pound of figs before you run? No, you do not. We ran that experiment in the 80s with triathlons. There are so many ways to do it. And also we do, like she said, there are ways where you can say, hey, where am I going to put this fuel in? Mm-hmm. What is appropriate here? And what we found is suddenly beans were like a villain. And we're like, whoa, beans turns out to be a great fiber source, great source of micronutrients, right? And do you have to have beans right before you run? No, you do not. But it really expanded what people could eat again. The white potato was the devil's food. And we're like, hey, hold up, a baked potato can be an incredible fuel source for you and count towards your fiber and your 800 grams. So it really did, get people back into oh, hey, a banana. Instead of reaching for a Costco cookie, I'm going to go eat a banana instead. I guarantee you that's a better choice.
Well, and also, as you know, Kyla, it's all bets are off. Whatever people need to eat intra-session that works for them, that's great. Do that. But I mean, let's be honest. Most of the people listening to this are probably recreational athletes and weekend warriors, probably not training for more than 3 hours a day. So that's another 21 hours in which you can eat 800 grams of fruits and vegetables, right? Yeah. And not have to worry about your GI tract. So yeah, I mean, a serious endurance athlete may need to think more about the timing of this. But I mean, again, I'm saying in those 23 hours, you can eat 4 apples.
And you're probably not getting enough fiber anyway. So stop.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's definitely an area, the gut microbiome for sure with the endurance athletes. So what other things can people learn from Built to Move? What are these other 10 essential healthy living habits?
One of the things that we're really keen on is trying not to overwhelm people with a list of things they have to do. Mm. So we don't want you to have to summon a freakish amount of dedication and motivation and willpower. We want you to spend those will credits on the real difficult decisions. Am I going to do another interval here? Right? This is going to be brutal. Am I going to let Kyla drop me on the hill again? So instead, it's more effective for us to really look at when can we and how can we help you modify your behaviors? And when do you have agency in your life? And it turns out what we've done through here is try to say, hey, look, let's look at the day a little bit differently in something we call the 24-hour duty cycle, and start to ask when and where can we have these positive behavior changes to address some of your blind spots, or at the very least on your recovery days, really max out your care and feeding of your body.
Nice. I dig it. I saw all kinds of things in there with regards to covering sleep. I mean, we hit on nutrition, squat. There's a sitting on the floor test, like number of steps to kind of aim for, get those movement in as you're talking about, move that lymphatic fluid, I guess, through the body. All of that. So I think it's going to be a fantastic book for our listeners. When can they get their hands on it?
It's hitting the official airwaves on April 4th.
Ooh, okay.
Very soon.
Yeah.
And, we're going to be out there talking about it. We'll be on Good Morning America on the morning of April 4th. If anyone
tune in
have a job and wants to tune in.
Yeah. Perfect. Excellent.
And let me just say this, that, because we get to go behind the scenes of so many high performance groups, this book is the first thing and the first conversation I have with people around trying to understand where they can go faster and get better. Yeah. And even just recently, I'm working with a 2-time world champion athlete who was under fueling and not feeling great and under-resourced. And then that was leading him to more injury and fatigue. And all we did was make sure that he was eating more. And guess what? He ended up starting to feel better. So don't think that it doesn't have something for you in here, because it is the basis of performance. But also, we want to create a resource because we see you as the node, that you are the local expert of all your friends and all your neighbors. They ask you, and people are like, hey, I want to get started. What should I do? And you can literally say, here, start with this. This is the base camp set of behaviors. And then when you starting to feel good with this, we can have the next conversation.
Yeah. It's the nailing the basics kind of, right? I mean, people miss that and they want to jump ahead to the supplement.
It may not be as sexy, but the basics really work.
They do. So where can people find you, find the book, follow the Ready State? Where can they do all that stuff?
People can learn more about the book and buy it at builttomove.com, or they can get it at any of their, local bookstores, major online retailers like Amazon. People can follow us at the Ready State on Instagram. I'm at Juliet Starrett on Instagram. I'm kind of like the behind the scenes, filming Kelly dancing and what's going on in our home life kind of stuff. And depending on when this podcast is coming out, we're actually running a big sweepstakes where we have acquired a ridiculous amount of prizes. So people can enter to win prizes, and they get more entries if they buy a copy of the book.
All right. Amazing. And then before we finish up here, we of course have to reveal the 2 truths and a lie. So Juliet, you said your dietary kryptonite was Diet Dr. Pepper, that you swam class 5 rapids on every single continent aside from Antarctica, and then were attacked by a hippo in Zimbabwe. I'm guessing, Nia, I guess the kryptonite was not Diet Dr. Pepper. What was your lie?
My lie was actually swimming class 5 rapids on every continent, because
Really?
I haven't done it in Asia.
Okay.
I do really love Diet Dr. Pepper, but you know me as a friend, and I mean, popcorn and red vines would also be on that list. So I mean, you were right in the other dietary.
And let me just say, Juliet literally has swam some of the scariest rivers in the world.
I've swam so many class 5 rapids, like too many for one.
Wow. Goodness. Yikes. And then let's see, Kelly grew up in Europe and won a European national champ for folk dancing, flicked a human head into the river, and I forget which country that was in, and then touched Chris Hemsworth's butt. Which was your lie?
Well, I was in a traveling folk dance troupe as a child, but we didn't compete. So that's the lie.
Oh my God.
You're gonna have to wait till our next bike ride, Kyla, to hear the flick head story.
But I did flick a head. I was guiding in Nepal, and we found a head, and we didn't want to freak out the guests, so we decided collectively to flick the head into the river
with a stick.
And I was the person who had to do that. So that was traumatizing.
Wait,
and then yes, I have touched Chris Hemsworth's butt.
Wait. I'm like, I need to get more deets on the next bike ride about this. This is crazy. Do you think the human head was it a murder or was it like attacked by some animal?
It was natural death.
Okay.
They had buried it in the cairn, and then an animal had chewed the neck, and the head was just laying there, and it was pretty fresh head. So if you've ever tried to poke a head with a stick, it's really difficult. I can't tell you
how many people do you think have actually tried to do that? Like, not that many.
There's enough of us out there. There's
grave robbers.
Grave robbers. They used a shovel, but this was tricky.
Gnarly. Oh my goodness. Well, that was an exciting episode, you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will link all those things in the show notes for the listeners on where to get the book, where to follow you guys, all that good stuff. So everyone can get their 10 essential habits all ready to go so they can live life optimally. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kyla.
Go smash your guts, people.